In a small, quiet town nestled deep in the woods of Michigan, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The streets were lined with modest houses, their front yards dotted with flower beds and old oak trees that had stood there for decades. People knew each other by name, and neighbors often gathered on porches to share stories or sip lemonade during warm summer evenings. It was the kind of place where nothing much seemed to happen, until one fateful day in 1997, when everything changed, forever. Marcus Johnson was just 10 years old, full of energy and dreams bigger than the sky. He loved playing baseball, climbing trees, and riding his bike down the dusty trails behind his house. His laughter could light up any room, and his big brown eyes sparkled with mischief whenever he hatched a new plan for adventure. To his mother, Evelyn, Marcus was her whole world. She worked long hours at the local diner to provide for him, but she always made sure they spent time together every evening, sharing meals and talking about their days. On July 15, 1997, Marcus woke up early, excited to spend the day outdoors. School had been out for weeks, and summer stretched ahead like an endless promise of fun. After breakfast, he kissed his mom goodbye and told her he was heading to the edge of the forest to play. "Be careful," Evelyn called after him, not thinking twice about it. Kids often played near the woods. It wasn't unusual, but this time something felt different. Though Evelyn couldn't put her finger on it then, she later realized that moment marked the beginning of a nightmare she would never forget. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Evelyn grew worried. Marcus hadn't come home yet, which was strange because he always returned before dark. At first, she thought maybe he'd lost track of time or gotten distracted by friends. She stepped outside and called his name, her voice echoing through the stillness of the evening. When no answer came, panic started creeping into her chest. She grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the forest, calling louder now. Still, there was no sign of him. By midnight, the entire neighborhood was awake and searching. Neighbors formed groups, combing through the woods with flashlights and lanterns. Some checked nearby streams while others drove around town, asking if anyone had seen Marcus. Flyers were hastily printed and taped to lampposts and store windows. Missing Marcus Johnson, 10 years old. Last seen wearing blue jeans, a red t-shirt, and a gray baseball cap. Beneath the words was a picture of Marcus smiling brightly, holding his favorite toy car. The police joined the search the next morning, bringing dogs trained to track scents. Officers questioned everyone who lived nearby, hoping someone might have noticed something unusual. But despite all efforts, no trace of Marcus could be found. Not a single clue turned up. Not a torn piece of clothing, not a dropped shoe, not even footprints leading away from the area where he was last seen. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Days turned into weeks, and the town remained gripped by fear and sadness. Parents held their children closer, afraid of letting them out of sight. Teachers at the elementary school spoke softly about Marcus, remembering how he used to raise his hand eagerly during class and crack jokes that made everyone laugh. Even kids who barely knew him felt the weight of his absence. Playgrounds once filled with shouts and giggles now seemed eerily silent. Evelyn refused to give up hope. She spent countless hours walking along the forest's edge, calling Marcus's name until her voice grew hoarse. Friends tried to comfort her, telling her to stay strong, but the pain etched on her face was unbearable to witness. Every night, she left the porch light on, praying that Marcus would somehow find his way back home. Meanwhile, rumors swirled through the town. Some whispered about strangers passing through who might have taken him. Others speculated about wild animals or accidents in the woods. A few even suggested darker possibilities, though no one dared say them aloud. The lack of answers only fueled people's imaginations, turning what should have been a straightforward search into a labyrinth of uncertainty. Reporters from nearby cities arrived, eager to cover the story. Cameras flashed as Evelyn tearfully pleaded for help during press conferences. "Please," she begged, clutching a photo of Marcus. "If anyone knows anything, please tell us. Bring my baby boy back to me." Her words struck a chord with viewers across the region, and tips poured in from far and wide. Unfortunately, none of them panned out. Each lead ended in disappointment, leaving the family and investigators empty-handed. As months passed, the intensity of the search waned. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible under the circumstances. Flyers, faded in the rain and sun, peeling off walls and lampposts. News outlets stopped covering the case, moving on to fresher headlines. Yet for those who truly cared, Marcus's disappearance remained a gaping wound that refused to heal. Every year, on July 15th, Evelyn lit a candle in her window and prayed for answers. She visited the forest regularly, sitting quietly among the trees as if waiting for some sign, some whisper from beyond that might explain what happened to her son. Her faith kept her going, but the unanswered questions gnawed at her soul. Who had seen Marcus last? Why had no one heard him cry for help? And most importantly, where was he now? For the rest of the town, Marcus became both a memory and a ghost, a reminder of innocence lost and the fragility of life. Conversations about him lingered in hushed tones, especially among older residents who remembered the vibrant boy who used to zoom past their houses on his bike. Children born after 1997 grew up hearing fragments of the story, piecing together bits of truth and speculation. To them, Marcus was more legend than reality, a shadowy figure whose fate remained shrouded in mystery. Little did anyone know that, 23 years later, a discovery buried deep within the forest would reignite interest in Marcus's case and bring long-buried secrets bubbling to the surface. Until then, the town carried on, haunted by the unanswered question, what really happened to Marcus Johnson on that summer day in 1997? 23 years had passed since Marcus Johnson vanished without a trace, and the once bustling town in Michigan now felt like a shadow of its former self. The streets were quieter, the laughter of children less frequent, and many of the faces that once filled the neighborhood had aged or moved away. Yet for some, the memory of Marcus remained vivid, refusing to fade with time. Among them was Thomas Reed, a man who had grown up alongside Marcus, though they weren't particularly close friends. Thomas was just a teenager when Marcus disappeared, but the event left an indelible mark on him. Now in his late 40s, Thomas lived alone in a modest house on the outskirts of town. He worked as a mechanic, fixing cars and tinkering with engines to pass the days, but his mind often wandered back to that summer of 1997, replaying fragments of memories he wished he could forget. He remembered seeing Marcus at the school playground, tossing a baseball with other kids, his grin wide and carefree. He also recalled the frantic searches, the endless calls for help, and the growing despair that settled over the community as weeks turned into months. For years, Thomas tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on building a life for himself. But something about Marcus's case kept pulling him back, like an unresolved puzzle begging to be solved. Thomas wasn't the only one haunted by the past. The forest where Marcus was last seen still loomed at the edge of town, its dense trees casting long shadows even on sunny days. Over the years, it had earned a reputation as a place of mystery and unease. Parents warned their children to stay away, and few dared to venture too far inside. Yet for Thomas, the forest held a strange allure. He found himself drawn to it more and more, walking along its trails during weekends or sitting quietly beneath the towering pines. It wasn't nostalgia or curiosity that brought him there. It was something deeper, almost instinctual. He couldn't explain it, but he felt certain that the answers to Marcus's disappearance lay hidden somewhere within those woods. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. As he sipped his coffee, staring out the window at the golden hues of the season, an idea struck him. What if he searched the forest again, not aimlessly this time, but systematically? Technology had advanced significantly since 1997. Tools like metal detectors and GPS devices might uncover clues that had eluded everyone before. Determined to act on his hunch, Thomas borrowed a metal detector from a friend and set out early, armed with nothing but hope and resolve. The forest greeted him with its usual quiet majesty. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, creating dappled patterns on the ground. Birds chirped softly, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at squirrels darting between branches. Despite its beauty, the place carried an undeniable weight, a lingering sadness that seemed to seep into the very soil. Thomas shook off the eerie feeling and began his search near the trailhead, sweeping the metal detector slowly across the ground. Hours passed without success, and frustration started to creep in. Just as he was about to call it quits, the device emitted a faint beep. Kneeling down, Thomas brushed aside layers of leaves and dirt, revealing something metallic glinting faintly beneath the surface. His heart raced as he dug carefully, his hands trembling with anticipation. Moments later, he unearthed a small rusted tin box partially buried under a tangle of roots. The lid was slightly ajar, and when Thomas opened it fully, he froze. Inside were several items. A faded photograph of Marcus smiling brightly, a worn gray baseball cap that matched the description of what he'd been wearing the day he disappeared, and a crumpled piece of notebook paper folded neatly at the bottom. Thomas stared at the contents, his mind reeling. This wasn't random junk discarded by hikers or hunters. It was deliberate, almost ceremonial. Someone had gone to great lengths to bury these objects here, and they clearly meant something significant. He unfolded the letter cautiously, smoothing out the creases to read the shaky handwriting scrawled across the page. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry." There was no signature, no indication of who had written it, but the words sent chills running down Thomas's spine. They hinted at guilt, remorse, and perhaps even involvement in Marcus's disappearance. Unable to process everything at once, Thomas packed up the tin box and hurried home. His hands shook as he placed the items on his kitchen table, studying each one intently. The photograph showed Marcus posing proudly next to a treehouse, likely taken not long before he vanished. The baseball cap looked exactly like the one described in the flyers all those years ago. And then there was the letter, cryptic yet undeniably connected to the tragedy. Who had written it? Was it from someone involved in Marcus's fate? Or could it have been written by Marcus himself, somehow managing to leave behind a message before vanishing? Determined to get answers, Thomas contacted the local authorities the very next day. Detective Laura Hayes, who had recently transferred to the department, took charge of the case. She listened intently as Thomas recounted how he'd found the tin box and shared his theories about its contents. Intrigued, she agreed to reopen Marcus's file, which had gathered dust in storage for decades. Forensic experts were called in to analyze the items using modern techniques unavailable in 1997. Initial tests confirmed that the photograph cap and letter dated back to the same time period as Marcus's disappearance. This revelation reignited interest, not only among law enforcement but also within the community. Word spread quickly, and soon the entire town was buzzing with speculation. Flyers featuring images of the newly discovered items appeared around town, urging anyone with information to come forward. Reporters descended on the area once again, eager to cover the latest developments. Evelyn Johnson, Marcus's mother, was contacted immediately. Now in her 60s, she had moved away years ago but returned to Michigan upon hearing the news. When Thomas met her in person to show her the photograph and letter, she broke down in tears, clutching the picture tightly to her chest. "It's him," Evelyn whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "That's my baby boy." She recognized the treehouse in the background. It belonged to a neighbor who had since passed away. As for the letter, she couldn't say for sure who might have written it, but the apology resonated deeply with her. "Someone knows what happened to him," she said firmly, "and we need to find out who." Thomas felt a mix of relief and unease as he watched Evelyn's reaction. On one hand, he was glad to have provided some semblance of closure after so many years. On the other hand, the discovery raised more questions than answers. Who had buried the tin box? Why had they chosen that particular spot? And most importantly, what did the letter mean? These uncertainties gnawed at him, driving him to dig deeper. Over the following weeks, Thomas became consumed by the investigation. He spent hours poring over old newspaper clippings, interviewing residents who had lived in the town back in 1997, and revisiting the forest in search of additional clues. Detective Hayes appreciated his dedication, often collaborating with him to piece together fragments of the puzzle. Together, they uncovered whispers of forgotten rumors, stories about teenagers who used to hang out in the woods, sometimes bullying younger kids or getting into trouble. One name kept surfacing repeatedly: Daniel Harper, a troubled youth known for his volatile temper and cruel pranks. Daniel had died years ago in a car accident, leaving behind a sister named Rachel. When approached by investigators, Rachel hesitated at first, clearly uncomfortable discussing her brother's past. But eventually she admitted that Daniel had confided in her shortly after Marcus disappeared. According to Rachel, Daniel claimed he'd gotten into a fight with Marcus in the woods and accidentally hurt him. Panicked and afraid of facing consequences, he convinced his friends to help cover up what happened. Though Rachel insisted she didn't know the full details, her confession painted a chilling picture of recklessness and fear spiraling out of control. As the truth began to emerge, the town grappled with shock and guilt. Many wondered how such a secret could have remained hidden for so long. Parents reflected on their own roles, questioning whether they could have done more to protect Marcus. The forest, once a symbol of dread, transformed into a site of reflection and healing. Trees were planted in Marcus's memory, creating a peaceful grove where families could gather to honor his legacy. For Thomas, the journey had been both exhausting and rewarding. He never imagined that a simple walk in the woods would lead to such a profound discovery. Though the story ended in sorrow, it also carried lessons about resilience, courage, and the enduring power of hope. Marcus's legacy lived on, not as a victim of tragedy, but as a beacon guiding others toward truth and reconciliation. When Thomas first handed the rusted tin box to Detective Laura Hayes, he didn't fully grasp the ripple effect it would create. The items inside, the faded photograph of Marcus, the worn baseball cap, and the cryptic letter, were more than just relics of the past. They were keys to unlocking a mystery that had haunted the town for over 2 decades. For Evelyn Johnson, Marcus's mother, these objects brought both pain and hope. Pain because they served as stark reminders of her son's tragic disappearance, and hope because they hinted at the possibility of finally understanding what had happened to him. Detective Hayes wasted no time diving into the investigation. She assembled a team of forensic experts who meticulously examined each item. Using advanced techniques, they confirmed that the photograph, baseball cap, and letter all dated back to 1997, the year Marcus vanished. This timeline alignment was crucial. It ruled out the possibility of someone planting the items recently as a hoax. The experts also analyzed the handwriting on the letter, comparing it to samples from people connected to the case. While no definitive match emerged, the shaky penmanship suggested the writer was either young or deeply distressed when composing the message. Meanwhile, Thomas couldn't shake off the feeling that he was sitting on the edge of something monumental. Every night he sat at his kitchen table, staring at copies of the letter and photo, trying to decode their meaning. He replayed conversations he'd had with townsfolk in his mind, searching for overlooked details. One name kept surfacing during his interviews: Daniel Harper. Daniel had been a teenager in 1997, known for his short temper and tendency to bully younger kids. Though he died years ago in a car accident, rumors about his involvement in Marcus's disappearance persisted like whispers carried by the wind. Thomas decided to dig deeper into Daniel's life. He visited Rachel Harper, Daniel's older sister, who still lived in the same house where they grew up. Rachel was wary at first, hesitant to dredge up painful memories. But Thomas's sincerity won her over, and she agreed to talk. Sitting across from him in her dimly lit living room, Rachel recounted fragments of her brother's troubled adolescence. Daniel wasn't a bad kid, she began softly, her voice tinged with sadness. He just made poor choices, and he hung out with the wrong crowd. Rachel went on to describe how Daniel often ventured into the woods with his friends, drinking beer and causing mischief. Sometimes they picked on younger kids who wandered too close to their hangout spots. After Marcus disappeared, Rachel continued, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel came home one night looking scared. He told me he'd gotten into a fight with some boy in the woods. He said it was an accident, that he didn't mean to hurt him. Her confession sent a chill through the room. She claimed Daniel begged his friends to help cover up what happened, though she never knew the specifics. I didn't ask questions, Rachel admitted. I thought if I ignored it, maybe it would go away. This revelation stunned Thomas. Could Daniel and his friends have been responsible for Marcus's fate? If so, why bury the tin box years later? Was it guilt driving them, or something else entirely? Thomas relayed this information to Detective Hayes, who immediately sought permission to exhume Daniel's remains for further analysis. Though the request raised ethical concerns, authorities granted approval given the gravity of the case. DNA testing revealed traces of Marcus's blood on Daniel's clothing, a damning piece of evidence linking him directly to the tragedy. As news of these developments spread, the town braced itself for another wave of shock and sorrow. Flyers featuring updates on the investigation appeared everywhere, urging anyone with additional information to come forward. Reporters flocked to the area once again, setting up camp outside the police station and knocking on doors for interviews. The renewed attention reignited old wounds, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about their community's past. Evelyn Johnson returned to Michigan, determined to see justice served for her son. Now in her 60s, she carried herself with quiet strength, her eyes reflecting decades of heartache. When Detective Hayes showed her the forensic findings, Evelyn broke down in tears. "All these years," she murmured, clutching the photograph of Marcus tightly, "I just wanted to know what happened to my baby." Despite the pain, she expressed gratitude for the progress being made. "At least now we have answers," she said. "That's more than I ever thought possible." For Thomas, the case became personal. He felt a deep responsibility to ensure Marcus's story didn't fade into obscurity again. Every evening he walked along the forest trails, piecing together the events in his mind. He imagined Daniel and his friends panicking after realizing the severity of the situation, hastily burying the tin box as a way to silence their guilt. Perhaps the letter was written by Daniel himself, a final act of contrition before his untimely death. Or maybe one of his accomplices penned it, unable to bear the weight of their secret any longer. Whatever the truth, Thomas vowed to uncover. So the investigation took an unexpected turn when a former resident of the town reached out to authorities. Sarah Miller, now living hundreds of miles away, remembered hearing rumors as a child about a group of teenagers involved in Marcus's disappearance. She identified two names besides Daniel: Mike Carter and Jason Reed, no relation to Thomas. Both men were tracked down and questioned separately. Under intense scrutiny, they eventually confessed to helping Daniel hide evidence after the incident. According to them, Daniel had panicked and convinced them to bury the tin box deep in the forest, swearing them to secrecy. Fearful of repercussions, they complied, carrying the burden of their actions in silence for over 20 years. Their confessions provided closure but left lingering questions. Why hadn't they spoken up sooner? How could they live with themselves, knowing they'd let a grieving mother suffer without answers? Detective Hayes pressed them hard, emphasizing the importance of accountability. "You may not have caused Marcus's death," she told them sternly, "but your silence prolonged his family's agony. That's something you'll have to live with." Back in the town, reactions varied. Some residents expressed anger toward Daniel and his friends, blaming them for shattering the community's sense of safety. Others felt pity, recognizing the devastating consequences of youthful recklessness. Parents held their children closer, reminding them of the value of honesty and responsibility. Teachers incorporated discussions about empathy and integrity into their lessons, using Marcus's story as a cautionary tale. Despite the grim revelations, there were glimmers of hope. The town rallied around Evelyn, organizing fundraisers and memorial events to honor Marcus's memory. A scholarship fund was established in his name, supporting underprivileged students pursuing higher education. Volunteers planted trees near the grove where the tin box was found, creating a serene space for reflection. Plaques bearing Marcus's name dotted the area, serving as reminders of the boy whose life was tragically cut short. Thomas played a pivotal role in these efforts, channeling his energy into advocacy work. Inspired by the breakthrough in Marcus's case, he began researching other cold cases in the region, determined to bring closure to families still waiting for answers. He partnered with local law enforcement, sharing tips and strategies gleaned from his experience. His dedication earned him respect within the community, transforming him from a mechanic with a curious streak into a symbol of perseverance and justice. Yet, even as progress was made, Thomas couldn't escape the haunting question. What if he hadn't gone into the forest that day? Would the tin box have remained buried forever, its secrets lost to time? The thought weighed heavily on him, reinforcing the idea that sometimes truth lies hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for someone brave enough to seek it out. As autumn gave way to winter, the forest transformed once again. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling sounds and casting a peaceful hush over the landscape. Thomas stood at the edge of the grove, gazing at the trees that had guarded Marcus's story for so long. He felt a mix of emotions: sadness for the life cut short, pride in having uncovered the truth, and resolve to keep fighting for justice. In that moment, he realized that while Marcus's physical presence was gone, his spirit endured. It lived on in the hearts of those who loved him, in the lessons learned by the community, and in the unwavering determination of people like Thomas to ensure no one else suffered the same fate. Though the journey had been long and arduous, it underscored a powerful truth. Even in the face of unimaginable loss, hope can prevail. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step forward and ask the hard questions to change the course of history. The discovery of the tin box and the subsequent confessions from Daniel Harper's friends brought a wave of emotions to the surface, not just for Marcus Johnson's family, but for the entire town. For years, the mystery of Marcus's disappearance had lingered like an open wound, festering beneath the surface of daily life. Now, with pieces of the puzzle falling into place, the community faced a reckoning. The truth was painful, yes, but it also carried a strange kind of relief. Finally, there were answers, ugly and tragic though they might be. Detective Laura Hayes worked tirelessly to piece together the final details of what happened on that fateful day in July 1997. With statements from Mike Carter and Jason Reed, as well as forensic evidence linking Daniel Harper to Marcus's death, a clearer picture began to emerge. According to their accounts, Daniel and his group of friends had been drinking in the woods when Marcus wandered nearby. Known for picking on younger kids, Daniel taunted Marcus, escalating the situation until it turned physical. In the heat of the moment, Daniel shoved Marcus hard enough to knock him off balance. Marcus hit his head on a rock, leaving him unconscious and bleeding. Panicked, the teenagers argued over what to do next. None of them wanted to face the consequences of what had happened. Daniel, terrified of going to jail, convinced his friends to help him bury any evidence that could connect them to Marcus. They wrapped his body in an old tarp they found nearby and carried it deeper into the forest, hiding it under fallen logs and brush. The baseball cap and photograph, the very items later placed in the tin box, had fallen from Marcus during the struggle. Days later, consumed by guilt, Daniel returned to the scene alone and buried the tin box, along with the cryptic letter, hoping it would serve as some form of penance. This account painted a chilling portrait of youthful recklessness spiraling out of control. Detective Hayes ensured that every detail was documented meticulously, knowing how important it was to get the story right, not just for legal purposes, but for Marcus's family. Evelyn Johnson listened intently as Hayes explained the findings, her hands trembling as she absorbed the weight of the revelation. "So my boy is gone," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And those boys, they took him away." Evelyn's grief was overwhelming, yet she refused to let anger consume her entirely. Instead, she channeled her emotions into action. She insisted on visiting the spot where Marcus's remains were believed to be hidden, accompanied by Thomas Reed and Detective Hayes. Standing among the towering trees, She knelt on the damp earth, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, baby," she murmured softly as if speaking directly to Marcus. "Mama's here now." It was a heartbreaking moment, one that left everyone present deeply moved. For Thomas, witnessing Evelyn's pain reinforced his determination to see justice served. He couldn't undo the past, but he could ensure that Marcus's story didn't fade into obscurity again. Together with Detective Hayes, he spearheaded efforts to recover Marcus's remains. Forensic teams combed through the dense forest, guided by the information provided by Daniel's former friends. After several days of painstaking work, they uncovered the makeshift grave, a grim reminder of the tragedy that unfolded nearly 25 years earlier. Though the passage of time had taken its toll, enough evidence remained to confirm the identity of the remains as Marcus Johnson. The confirmation brought both closure and renewed sorrow. Evelyn held a private memorial service for Marcus, attended only by close family and friends. Later, the town organized a public ceremony to honor his memory. Hundreds of residents gathered at the edge of the forest, standing shoulder to shoulder as speeches were given and prayers offered. A plaque was unveiled bearing Marcus's name, alongside a message urging future generations to remember the importance of kindness, accountability, and compassion. As the investigation wrapped up, attention shifted toward holding those responsible accountable. While Daniel Harper was no longer alive to face charges, Mike Carter and Jason Reed were arrested and charged with accessory to manslaughter and obstruction of justice. Their initial reluctance to cooperate had already caused decades of suffering for Marcus's family and the community at whole. During court proceedings, both men expressed remorse, claiming they acted out of fear and immaturity. "We were kids," Mike said during his testimony, his voice cracking. "But I know now that doesn't excuse what we did. We should have told someone. We should have done the right thing." The judge presiding over the case acknowledged their regret but emphasized the gravity of their actions. "Your silence allowed this family to endure unimaginable pain for over 2 decades, he declared sternly. "Justice demands accountability." Both men received prison sentences, though they were eligible for parole after serving a portion of their terms. Some townspeople felt the punishment was too lenient, while others believed it reflected the complexities of human error and redemption. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to advocate for greater awareness around cold cases. Inspired by the breakthrough in Marcus's disappearance, he partnered with local organizations to launch a campaign aimed at solving similar mysteries across Michigan. He traveled to neighboring towns, sharing his experience and encouraging families to keep pushing for answers. His message resonated deeply. If we don't ask the questions, who will? If we don't search for the truth, it stays buried forever. Back in the small Michigan town, life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but it was forever changed. Parents became more vigilant, teachers incorporated lessons about empathy and responsibility into their curriculums, and the forest itself transformed into a symbol of healing rather than fear. Trees planted in Marcus's memory created a peaceful grove where people could gather to reflect or simply sit quietly. Plaques dotted the area, each one etched with messages of hope and resilience. Evelyn found solace in these changes, even as she struggled to come to terms with her loss. She visited the grove often, bringing flowers and sitting beneath the shade of the trees. Sometimes she spoke aloud, sharing stories about Marcus's childhood or recounting dreams she'd had about him. Other times she simply sat in silence, listening to the rustle of leaves and imagining her son playing happily among them. Though the ache of losing Marcus never fully disappeared, she learned to carry it differently, with gratitude for the love they shared and pride in the legacy he left behind. Thomas, too, found a new sense of purpose. What started as a solitary walk in the woods had blossomed into a mission to bring light to dark corners of the past. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. Uncovering truths often meant confronting uncomfortable realities. But he also knew that every step forward mattered. Each clue unearthed, each voice heard, each family comforted, it all contributed to a larger tapestry of healing and justice. As winter settled over the town once again, snow blanketing the ground and muffling sounds, Thomas stood at the edge of the grove. He gazed at the trees, their branches bare and reaching skyward, and felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Marcus's story, but to the countless others waiting to be told. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with moments of despair and triumph alike. Yet through it all, one truth remained constant. Even in the darkest places, hope could take root and grow. The years following the resolution of Marcus Johnson's case brought profound changes, not just to the small Michigan town where he once lived, but also to the lives of those who had been touched by his story. The forest, once a place of fear and mystery, transformed into a sanctuary of healing and reflection. Trees planted in Marcus's memory grew taller with each passing season, their branches stretching toward the sky as if reaching for something greater. Plaques bearing messages of hope and resilience dotted the area, inviting visitors to pause and remember not only Marcus, but all the lives lost too soon. For Evelyn Johnson, Marcus's mother, life continued to carry the weight of her loss. Yet, she found ways to honor her son's memory that gave her strength. She became an advocate for missing children, partnering with organizations dedicated to solving cold cases and supporting grieving families. Her voice carried power, born from decades of unanswered questions and unrelenting hope, and she used it to inspire others. At conferences and community events, Evelyn shared Marcus's story, urging people never to give up on finding answers. "Every child deserves to be remembered," she often said, her words steady despite the tears in her eyes. "And every family deserves closure." Thomas Reed, whose discovery of the tin box reignited the investigation, emerged as a local hero. Though he shied away from the title, his actions spoke louder than any accolade ever could. He traveled across the state, working closely with law enforcement agencies and families of missing persons to shed light on unresolved cases. His approach was methodical yet compassionate. He understood the delicate balance between seeking justice and respecting the pain of those left behind. Thomas's work extended beyond investigations. He organized workshops to teach communities how to use technology like metal detectors and drones to aid in searches. These efforts earned him widespread recognition, but more importantly, they gave countless families renewed hope. Detective Laura Hayes, too, found herself forever changed by the case. Solving Marcus's disappearance reminded her why she had chosen a career in law enforcement: to bring truth and peace to those who needed it most. She spearheaded initiatives within her department to prioritize cold cases, ensuring that no file gathered dust indefinitely. Under her leadership, a task force was formed specifically to tackle unsolved disappearances, combining modern forensic tools with old-fashioned detective work. Hayes became known not only for her sharp instincts, but also for her empathy, rare combination that made her uniquely suited to handle such emotionally charged cases. As for the town itself, Marcus's legacy inspired a cultural shift. Conversations about accountability, kindness, and responsibility became commonplace, woven into the fabric of daily life. Schools introduced programs aimed at teaching conflict resolution and fostering inclusivity among students. Teachers encouraged open dialogue, creating safe spaces where kids could express themselves without fear of judgment or ridicule. Parents grew more mindful of their roles as mentors, striving to instill values of integrity and compassion in their children. Even the local government took steps to address issues of neglect and oversight, implementing policies designed to protect vulnerable members of the community. The annual memorial service held in Marcus's honor became a cornerstone of the town's calendar. Every July 15th, residents gathered at the edge of the forest to pay tribute to the boy whose tragic fate spurred them toward change. Speeches were delivered, songs sung, and candles lit in his memory. Children released balloons into the sky, watching as they drifted upward, carrying messages of love and hope written on tiny slips of paper. For many attendees, the event served as both a reminder of the past and a celebration of progress, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Yet even amidst these positive developments, the scars of Marcus's disappearance remained visible. Older residents still spoke in hushed tones about the summer of 1997, recalling the frantic searches and endless nights spent wondering what had happened to the bright-eyed boy. Younger generations, though born long after Marcus vanished, grew up hearing fragments of his story passed down through whispers and stories. To them, Marcus was more than a name etched on a plaque. He represented the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. One of the most poignant reminders of this legacy came in the form of a scholarship fund established in Marcus's name. Created through donations from across the country, the fund supported underprivileged students pursuing higher education. Recipients were chosen based on essays they wrote about overcoming adversity and making a difference in their communities. Each year during the scholarship award ceremony, Evelyn delivered a heartfelt speech encouraging recipients to carry forward Marcus's spirit of curiosity and determination. He dreamed big dreams, she told them, her voice filled with pride. And so should you. For Thomas, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when the weight of his advocacy work felt overwhelming, moments when the enormity of unresolved cases threatened to drown him in despair. But he drew strength from the connections he forged along the way. From the families who hugged him tightly after receiving news of breakthroughs, to the volunteers who joined him on late-night searches through forests and fields. He reminded himself constantly of Marcus's story, how one small discovery had unraveled decades of silence, proving that even buried truths could rise again. Winter turned to spring, then summer, and finally autumn once more. Seasons changed, as they always did, bringing new beginnings and gentle reminders of impermanence. One crisp October morning, Thomas stood at the edge of the grove, gazing at the trees now ablaze with fiery hues of orange and red. He thought about Marcus, the laughter that had once echoed through these woods, the dreams cut tragically short, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude not just for the role he'd played in uncovering the truth, but for the lessons Marcus's story had taught him about courage, perseverance, and the enduring power of hope. In the distance, he noticed Evelyn approaching, her arms laden with fresh flowers. She smiled softly as she reached him, setting the bouquet beside a plaque engraved with Marcus's name. He loved this time of year, she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The colors, the cool air, it always made him happy. Thomas nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of her words. Together, they stood in silence, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. It was a peaceful moment, one that encapsulated everything Marcus's story had come to represent. Sorrow tempered by beauty, loss transformed into legacy. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the town, Thomas sat alone in his kitchen staring at a photograph of Marcus pinned to the wall. The boy's smile seemed brighter somehow, as if infused with the collective love and effort poured into honoring his memory. Thomas allowed himself a small smile, knowing that while Marcus's physical presence was gone, his impact would endure for generations to come. Justice had been served, yes, but more importantly, Marcus's story had sparked a movement toward healing, unity, and accountability. And so, life moved forward, a delicate dance between remembering the past and embracing the future. The forest that had once hidden secrets now stood as a beacon of hope, its towering trees whispering tales of resilience and redemption. Families reconnected, communities rebuilt trust, and individuals found purpose in the pursuit of truth. Marcus Johnson may have disappeared in 1997, but his legacy lived on, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a testament to the indomitable human spirit. In the end, the lesson was clear. Even in the face of unimaginable loss, there is always room for hope. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to dig deeper, to ask the hard questions, to shine a light in the darkest corners, to change the course of history.